Another type we need to talk about is called byte. Okay, so byte is the smallest container, I should put in quotation, right? Or memory space we can use. Let's do a little experiment here. Okay, let's go ahead in the int number, the first one, let's put more numbers here. Let's save, run. Things are still the same, working. The number is showing here. Okay, let's keep going, put it another, make it a really big number, save. There's a problem now. If you hover over, it says here, the number of type int is out of range. Well, it turns out like a physical container, like a physical bucket, if you will, in the real world, they all have capacity. Meaning, if you have a bottle of water that is 26 ounces, it can only carry 26 ounces of water. You cannot put 29 or 27 ounces of water, right? So the same things goes with this type. So the types, going back to this analogy of container, the types are containers, are just little buckets. Depending on how much data, how big the data you want to put in those buckets, you will also need to think about what type of variables you need to use. In this case, right away, you can see here that an integer bucket, right, cannot hold this number because it's too big of a number. If we start deleting from right to left, it will get to the point where that error will go away. Save, not yet, save, and there we go. So you can see this number can fit into an int. So the next one we're going to talk about, it's going to be byte. You will notice the byte is smallest in the sense that if we say, let's create a byte variable, we call this my byte, say equal, let's put 129, we're going to have a problem, and there it is. So now the problem here is saying, well, a byte can only hold about between minus 128 to 127. If we are assigning 129, that's more than 127. So if we go 128, we're still going to have a problem. However, if we go anything equal or less than 127, then we have no error here. Right now, this may not make a lot of sense. You may not feel like you will ever use this or there's even a need of knowing this. But later, once you start programming more and more and your programs become more complex, you will realize all of this, what are we talking about here, will make a lot more sense. The same thing we can do here, my byte, we can actually go ahead and say system.out.println and say my byte. There we go, enter. We always have to save, right? I said Command S, or you can go File and Save. There we go. And then let's run. And there we go, 127. Okay, because that's our byte here. Well, the next type we're going to look at is called short, which is twice the size of a byte. So this is considerably bigger than a byte. So we can go ahead here. Again, you notice we can say short. Okay, there's short, my short. We can even say something like that number, and you can see it holds it. And if you try to put more, you'll notice there's an error. Okay. And of course, you can do the same here. Let's concatenate here. Let's say short and say my short. Okay. And this one, just to be consistent, let's say that's my byte. We call it byte. There we go. So let's save this and run, and there we go. Okay, byte. Let's give a little space there. Perfect. Another space. Save that. Run, and there we go. Byte 127, 4,956. Great. All right. So now let's go ahead and talk about float. So a float is equivalent to a decimal number, essentially. So 1.89, that would be it. Now, one thing that you have to realize, so let's go ahead and create a float. So as you may have guessed right now, all you have to do is say float, say my float is equal to, say, 2.9. Now, here's the thing. To make sure that we let our interpreter, to let Java know that we mean to say a float, we want this to actually be a float, we have to put an F at the end there, right? If you don't, then you will have an error. So for us not to confuse our interpreter here, we have to put an F. Okay, that would mean this my float is a float number. All right, so the same thing we can do here. Let's go add to our pile here. Say float, give a space, plus my float. There we go. To organize things a little bit here. Okay, so if we save this, let's run, and there we go, float 2.9. The next one we're going to talk about is, it's called double. Double is twice as big as float, right? So which means it's still, for instance, something like that, that would be a double. But now if we go, we can actually specify it. Instead of saying float, we say double, because that's a type on itself. My double, let's say something like that. Now we know that this is indeed a double, okay? So if we go here again and say plus double plus my double, there we go. So now we're going to print that out as well. Let's save this, run, and there we go, 34.78. The next type is going to be a character, or a char, right? It's just a character. Okay, a character essentially is what it implies. So a P would be a letter, so that would be a character. The opening quotes, that's a character. That equal is a character. So we have a way to create a character or a char variable as well. So it would be something like an asterisk, an ampersand, or an @, and so forth. So those are characters. Okay, so what do? We say char, there it is, my char, give more space, is equal to, we then put in single quote C, for instance. So we're saying this C character is now held in my char variable, which is of type char, character. And now what we can do right here, say char, say my char, there we go. Save, let's run, and we should see C there. Now let's try something real quick. Let's go ahead and say like that. Aha, we have a problem. Why? Well, because we just put two more C's, two more characters. So there's more than it should be there, right? So that's the problem. So that's why we're getting this error. So this tells us that it only has to have one character, which is in this case C. Now notice again, I need to emphasize this. We don't have double quotes here like we did with our strings, right? Because you notice our string, we have double quotes and we have the actual value inside of that. But here we only have quote, one single quotes. Okay, that's the difference there. And the next one we're going to look at is a Boolean. So a Boolean can only hold two states. So holds two states, which are true and false, or 1 and 0. So a Boolean will only say whether it's on or off, whether it's 1 or 0, whether it's true or false. Okay, that's a very handy one, and we will see a lot of that in our next videos. How do we create a Boolean? Very simply, say bool, there's Boolean, my Boolean. Okay, so my Boolean, let's give it something to initialize it. Let's say true. Okay, well, if we go and print that out, guess what we're gonna get? Let's say Boolean here, plus, let's see, my Boolean. Okay, let's see what we get here. Save and run, and there it is, C Boolean. Let's give it spaces here, that way everything is very well organized. Let's save again and run. There we go. So we have Boolean true. Why is it true? Because we set it to be true. And if we wanted to, we can say, we could have said false. Okay, save that again. And you should see false in the bottom, at the bottom here. So what I just showed you here, these are called primitives, right? These are primitives data types, because the basics of all the programming we're going to be doing, we will use most of them. So we talk about a lot of things here, but one of the things I want you to take out of this is that in Java, you always have to have a type whenever you want to create a variable. And you notice also you need to initialize that variable, otherwise you get error. Okay, so if you say int number, just like that, it's not gonna work because you have to give it something before it becomes available. All right, so most often what would happen, you will see at a later time, when you want to initialize later in your program, you will just give it a 0, right? Because that's the initial value. We set it 0, and then later in our program, we do all the computing, and then that number will change, obviously. That variable will change and hold something else, okay? That's one thing to keep in mind. And of course, all these things you will see as we proceed into this course and learn more about Java. You'll starting to see how it all fits together very nicely. All right, so I'll see you in the next video.